Hello, my name is Kendall Hakala, and this is my submission for the Bay Area Science and Engineering Fair of 2021. For my project, I decided to focus specifically on the Maillard reaction and the distance between the heat source and the actual product that is being baked in regards to the formation of acrylamide. The Maillard reaction is a very common reaction. It's done perhaps millions of times a day by millions of different people. It is any time that food is being browned. It was actually discovered in 1912, which has been used consistently through that, both in food science and just general home kitchen. The Maillard reaction is defined as the interactions between reducing sugars and amino acids present in the food that is being cooked. For example, in this bread that I made, the interaction was between the amino acids of eggs and the reducing sugars found in granulated sugars that were both added into the egg wash before cooking the bread. The Maillard reaction is actually only able to occur at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is when the water is able to be evaporated and the Maillard reaction is able to crisp up the surface of whatever is being cooked. Another interesting thing is that the Maillard reaction is also responsible for the aromas that are created when cooking things. For example, the delicious smell of cookies when you take them right out of the oven, or freshly baked pizza before you eat it. All of that is formed by these compounds breaking down. The purpose of this experiment was more along the lines of determining what is the safest way of cooking food. Acrylamide is a very dangerous carcinogen that has been known to cause cancer in thousands of people. Cancer is still one of the diseases that we have very little knowledge about and what can cause it. But luckily, ingesting acrylamide is one of the things that we are able to identify and make use of in knowing that it can cause cancer. So, in order to keep the population safe and to lower the risk of potentially contracting cancer in the future, I think that this is a very important topic to explore further. The results that were found for this experiment was that the further away from the oven or from the heat source of the oven the bread was, the less browning was able to occur. For example, when choosing this type of bread, it was easier to decide because when braiding the bread, there are natural sort of humps that are created by the braiding structure, which brings different parts of the bread closer to the heat source and more and further away. As you can see in the photo of the bread, there are higher places of the bread that are quite brown, whereas in the little divots of the braid, it is remaining quite yellow and does not have a lot of brown that has um, impacted this bread. So, when observing the results of this experiment, it was determined that further away from the heat source is actually safer and is less likely to form acrylamide when cooking the products. This can apply to many different things, um, such as cookies or anything that you would cook in the oven. Um, when tasting the bread, it was interesting to note how much the bread had risen, and that is something that was noticed while following the procedure. The yeast that was recommended was active dry yeast, which is very standard when cooking things at a recreational level. And so that was what was used in creating this bread. But one of the things that was noticed was that this needed to be done multiple times. The yeast needs to sit in warm water and with a little bit of sugar in it to proof properly to allow it to rise effectively while waiting for the bread to come together and finish forming. But the yeast did not proof very effectively, and so it needed to be done multiple times. But the yeast actually does have quite a large effect on the results because the distance between the heat source and the actual product is very dependent on how much the bread is able to rise. If the bread was not able to rise as much as it normally would have, that could impact the results. Also, if the bread were to rise so much that it was very, very close to the heat source, that also would have had an interesting impact on the results. In the case of this bread, it seems to have risen quite well, and it seems that it may not have affected the bread as much as it was previously expected to. There was also a bit of difficulty in determining the color of the bread. Acrylamide is quite easy to identify on a product because it is very dark black and it has a very distinct smell because it has been burnt. But in the case of this, there was no acrylamide that was formed, but there were different levels and different tones of brownness that were able to be achieved by the Maillard reaction. So when observing this bread, it was difficult to determine where in the different stages of the Maillard reaction the different spots of the bread were because it was a very gradual change between the colors. When discussing the application, there are many different ways that we can use this. As I was saying earlier, the Maillard reaction is one of the most commonly used reactions in the entire world, and it is used by people who don't even understand what's happening and the science behind it. So, when dealing with the formation of acrylamide, it can be catastrophic to someone's health, which they may not understand until it is unfortunately too late. So, in trying to share this warning and this message with individuals, we can help make sure that the cases of cancer caused by this harmful carcinogen may be able to be reduced and may be able to help thousands of people um, go through life without experiencing the um, horrible results of potentially ingesting this carcinogen. There's a lot of health opportunities that can be taken advantage of when dealing with this. It has also been interesting to see how the oven is able to react um, when placing a product in. Ovens generally put out the same temperature when you set it to that temperature. But it was interesting to see how the recipe called for cooking the bread for only 25 minutes, whereas in reality, I needed to cook the bread for approximately 35 to 40 minutes in order to get the results that I wanted and in order for the bread to actually be cooked. It may also be very interesting to look into what is powering this heat. In the case of my oven, it is powered by natural gas, but some people may have it powered by electricity or various other methods to heat their ovens. And so it would be very interesting to see what that means for the different products being cooked and how that affects the formation of acrylamide. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day.